Tom Anderson from Bernardsville, New Jersey, told about a 2-week beach vacation that his family took, and during that time he was going to do an experiment regarding his wife, Evelyn. He had recently been listening to a series from a Christian marriage counselor regarding how to have a healthy and more joy-filled marriage. And at one point, the counselor quoted from 1 Peter 3, "You husbands must be careful of your wives, being thoughtful of their needs." And he said that he knew that he had been kind of selfish as a husband, putting his needs first because he was part of a Wall Street investment firm and he thought he worked so hard and maybe he deserved a little coddling when he got home. The counselor also said in that tape, love is an act of will. A person can choose to love. And he thought about the many times he had not chosen to love, even in small ways, chiding Evelyn for her tardiness, insisting on the TV channel that he wanted to watch rather than the one she wanted, and having an attitude that yesterday's news was old news and throwing out the paper, even though he knew that Evelyn had not yet read it. So he decided that over those 2 weeks, he would act out of thoughtfulness, kindness, and love towards his wife. And it started as soon as he got home from work and they were ready to go on their venture. He said to her, "Oh, honey, you look so pretty in that new yellow sweater." And her response was, "Tom, you noticed." And then, after a long drive to the beach, Evelyn suggested that they go on a walk on the beach. And he was tired and just wanted to sit, but he was going to be loving, and he said, of course. So they walked on the beach hand in hand. He knew that she'd been spending all her time with the children. The children flew their kites, and they had some one-on-one time with each other. And so the week went. He went to a shell museum, even though he hates museums. But Evelyn wanted to go, and he found that he kind of liked it. When he held his tongue when Evelyn was late, getting ready for a dinner date that they were going to have with friends. They relaxed during the whole vacation, and he kept remembering the scriptural advice to choose love. Everything was going very well. It was such a peaceful time until the last evening that they were there, and Evelyn was getting ready for bed, and he saw such a sad expression on her face, and he said, "Honey, what's the matter?" And she said, "Tom, do you know something I don't know?" And he says, "What?" She said, "You know, I had that checkup recently with our doctor. Did he tell you something about me? You've been so good to me during this vacation. Am I dying, Tom?" And he took a moment to take this in, and he just laughed and took her in his arms and said, "No, you're not dying. I'm just starting to live." God has given us a precious gift, the ability to choose. It's called free will. And being created in God's image, this is indeed a precious gift to be able to decide how to behave, to be able to decide what our opinions are on things. Our human story regarding free will is given to us in Genesis chapter 3, the story of Adam and Eve. Now, as Lutheran Christians, we do not see Adam and Eve as actual historical people, but as representatives and symbols for all of us. These writers were so clever in being able to say, you are Adam, you are Eve. So there you are in the garden, faced with your choice of free will. And what are you going to do? God says, if you choose to obey, you will have life. And if you disobey and eat that fruit, there will be death. Now, who in their right mind chooses death over life? We do. Why? Well, Spencer Morgan Rice tells the story of a remote Episcopalian church in a small area of Alaska whose vicar had left, and they needed a new priest. So therefore they contacted the national office on the mainland of the United States and were greeted warmly and were sent a whole bunch of forms to fill out to describe their ministry and their thoughts about what they wanted in their future. So they dutifully filled out all of these with great energy and sentiment. And what came back was a new set of forms asking them what they were looking for specifically in the gifts that a priest could bring to them. So they filled all of those out. And it back and forth this went, these letters, these forms, and 18 months later, they still did not have a new priest. So they sent a new letter to the National Council, which said, "Forget the priest, we have found that sinning is more fun." They had a new priest within 10 days. So what is the reason that people choose death over life? This lie that sinning is more fun. I talked this week to a man who has been embroiled in the addiction to pornography for decades, and now he is facing that addiction. And what first draws one into that kind of thing? The titillation, the high that comes with it. And therefore, over time, he's been dragged into death. A mental health survey was done where they asked the question, do you enjoy life and are you happy? How many people, what percentage of the people do you think said that they enjoyed life and were happy? 20%. That means 80% of the people, in a sense, were living death. Living death. Why? Could it be choosing death over life? What kind of ways do people do that? Some of them seem small. The choice to stay in a meaningless job rather than take the risk to change. The choice to suffer in silence rather than get help through counseling. The choice to drink to excess. The choice to take that first cocaine or heroin or now vaping. That's such a terrible death experience now, living death for many. People choose death over life when they choose to lash out to someone when maybe inside they really need to face their own demons. Who in their right mind would choose death over life? I, you, him, her. And when we do, we hurt others, but we hurt ourselves the most. Motivational speaker Zig Ziglar told about a successful jewelry thief who operated during the roaring 20s of the 20th century. He did his business in Boston, and he knew the wealthiest people, and he would sneak into their homes at night and steal the jewels. In fact, he was so good at it, and it seemed to be a status symbol among the wealthy that this particular jewel thief had come, because that meant you really had a lot of money. Well, eventually they found him. His name was Arthur Berry. They caught him. He got sent to prison for 20 years. And after he got out, he was leading a quiet, respectable life in a small New England town, and eventually it became known who he was, and some people from the press came calling. And one particular reporter said to him, "Mr. Berry, you stole from a lot of wealthy people in your life as a jewel thief. Let me ask you a question. From whom did you steal the most?" And without even a pause, he said, "That's the easiest question I've ever been asked. The man from whom I stole the most was Arthur Berry." I could have been somebody. I could have been successful on Wall Street. I was smart enough and I had the business sense to do it. The one that I robbed the most from was myself. The choices before us every day are sin and death, which robs us of ourselves, or life. And it comes to us from our lesson from Deuteronomy. This was written many centuries after the people had actually entered the Promised Land, and it was because the people had not been choosing life. They'd been choosing death, and therefore a writer cleverly puts this scene together. The people are ready to enter the Promised Land, and Moses says, I placed in front of you life and good, death and evil. Love God, your God. Walk in God's ways. Keep God's commandments, regulations, and rules so that you will live, really live exuberantly, blessed by God. These are the words of the biblical translation, the Message, which continues, if you have a change of heart, refuse to listen obediently, and willfully go off to serve and worship other gods, you will most certainly die. Choose life, Moses says to them. This congregation made a decision on Friday night that may lead to the death of this congregation. Does that mean that you chose death over life? I understand all of the feelings that go with that decision. But God's word to this congregation today is to remember Jesus, who it looked like he was choosing death over life when he hung on that cross. But what did God do to it? He turned it into resurrection. He turned it into new life. Pastor El-Yatim's powerful statement was one where he said, you cannot choose to stay together just because you love each other. Because God expects more. A mission of service beyond yourselves. To have chosen not to sell would have been worshiping the God of self. I truly believe that. But hope has chosen life, not death. And it likely will not be the continuing of this congregation. That, of course, is your decision. But it may be that $750,000 will bring life and resurrection to people that you don't even know yet, but who will be so blessed by the legacy of the people here. God will bring resurrection to each one of you in some ways. You don't know where God is at work right now to bring you all hope and life again. God will bring resurrection through you and to you. You have chosen life. Keep it up. Amen.